Good. So the name of today's shiur is, why do smart people, well, that's actually the question that we're asking, why do smart people sometimes do such stupid things, right? So today's topic will be called the psychology of sin. Now, for me personally, I remember I was 16 years old when I picked up a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. In fact, I recently found a CD of it here. And so I actually put it on in the car for my kids to listen to. It was the first self-help book that I ever picked up. And I found it quite fascinating and interesting. And what I found most interesting about this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens by Sean Covey, was that of all his tips and tricks and suggestions and hacks and ideas of how to become a better, more effective teenager, was that I knew all those things already from the Torah, but the packaging, the way he packaged it was so good. The way he introduced it to us, the way he put it forth. And the truth is, the answers to all these types of questions, like why do smart people do stupid things, and why is it that we sometimes get caught up in sinful behavior, why we do certain things, it's all in the Torah. Now, that doesn't preclude us, it doesn't stop us from doing these things. You know, you think about, a couple of months ago, I was doing my dissertation. Thank God I passed. It was accepted. Now I'm a master. I work on the PhD next, and I'll be doctor, right? And the tendency to sometimes procrastinate or to get involved in other things, whether it was justified or not. Listen, we have a very busy life here at Chabad. There's a lot going on, and there's no doubt good justified reasons, but then we wind up cramming it to the end, which is one of the seniors at Chabad House told me. And just sadly on that note, we have a funeral today for one of our members, Philip Gishin. Some of you might remember him. He's been coming to Chabad House for many years, attending our programs. He was very engaged and involved in our shiurim. Used to even challenge me sometimes if he disagreed, which I like that, by the way. You're all welcome to challenge me if you have questions of a different perspective or opinion that you want to share, with pleasure. So anyways, today, unfortunately, at 11:30 is Philip's funeral. If anyone wants to join, or you could watch it on Zoom, I think it's going to be a very small affair. But there's a lot to do, naturally, son. I'm sure everybody has good excuses. But one of the seniors said to me, you know why we come to your shiurim? We're cramming for the finals. We all tend to do that in one way or another, cramming for our finals. It's just part of life, right? And the thing is that as much as we might be conducting ourselves in that way, it's, if you have a better way of managing your time and not digressing and deviating from what you're supposed to be doing, then I would love to hear your suggestion. But I want to just share with you some insights from the Parsha. Just a moment. One of our members is calling. Leonie, yes? We're in the middle of the shir. Are you struggling to get in?
Today's now connected to the Zoom. That's why we keep trying.
Okay, keep trying. I'm letting people in. Okay, no problem. Leonie, we're just in the middle of the class, okay? Talk to you later. Be well, Leonie. Thanks. Okay, so the idea that we sometimes, for whatever reason or another, it's that we deviate and digress. And it's not only, when we talk about this concept, I know I called it the psychology of sin. And in the Parsha, in the context of what we're going to learn it based on, we are talking about sin, which we're going to get to in a moment in the actual text of the Parsha. But the concept, the idea of it could be related to anything in life. To why am I not doing what I'm supposed to be doing? To why am I, not keeping the commitments which I made? To why I'm not being the perfect child or parent or spouse or friend or human being or rabbi or rebbitzin or whatever it is that we're messing up on. Why am I not as focused on my business or my goals or my diet, whatever it might be? Everybody has their things. And I think I would ask each of us, yesterday we talked about dreaming. I'm going to ask you to daydream for a minute and to think, maybe you could identify some area, and perhaps more than one, in your life, I know certainly in my own, where perhaps we have that tendency. And we say we're going to fix it. We say we're going to take care of it, but it keeps on happening again and again and again, right? It's the last time I'm going to scream at my kids. What happens? 10 minutes later, our patience is tested again, and there we are. The volume rises, but I just said I'm not going to shout at them. Am I the only one who does that sometimes? Okay. Or I don't know. Tomorrow, there's a Hasidic custom that the Hasidic custom is that before we go to sleep at night, we say, tomorrow is going to be a better day. I know some people in the morning, they wake up, tomorrow will be a better day. Give up already in the morning. But do we tell ourselves that next time I'll be on time, right? I'll be punctual, I'll be better. And what happens? Human nature, right? The snooze button or whatever it might be. It's cold in the mornings here in Joburg. And all the other things that we say. Here at Chabad House, for the most part, we're focused on upliftment of Jewish life. We do have our non-sectarian programs. One of the cute innovations that came out of Chabad House last year was the phone cell. Yes, this is a cell phone. So we also have something called the phone cell, which is something we should probably be considering, because how many times does it happen? You're sitting down at a meeting or your family having dinner, and in the middle, we're checking our phones, just checking. It's one important message, right? Well, just one important message. How often does that happen? And that's why we created the phone cell, where we shouldn't be captive. We shouldn't be prisoners to our phone. That's why it's called a cell phone. But if we have the phone cell, you put it into there, and the phone is locked away for the meal, so we could spend time with the people we're sitting with, right? And this is I'm just throwing out ideas that come to my mind of how often these things happen. We make commitments. We say, I won't use my phone at the meeting or at the dinner or whatever it might be. Or we're just checking the message between fish and, between salad and the main course. So eventually we begin to realize that just deciding that we're going to do it better next time isn't really a recipe for effective self-help. So what really is the key to getting us out of that vicious cycle of bad habits that we find ourselves caught up in? What can we do to actually improve, to become better, to not repeat the same things? Because as we all know, the famous saying from Einstein, what's insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It's not going to happen. We have to find a different way. And so today I want to discuss the continuation of yesterday's discussion. Yesterday we talked about Bilam, who tried to curse the Jewish people at the call of Balak, the king, and it didn't work. God transformed his curses into blessings. So what did he do instead? He realized, he has another way of getting us. And what was it? What was his way to getting at the Jewish people? He understood that we're a spiritual nation and we're spiritually sensitive, as we discussed yesterday. So after the curses weren't effective, Bilam tried a different method. And that method was to get the Jewish people into behaving promiscuously. And if he gets us to commit adultery, which would result into idolatry, which the three cardinal laws that a Jew is never allowed to violate: adultery, idolatry, and murder. But all three came to happen. And that's where he knew that he'll be able to cause our downfall. And that's exactly what happens in our Parsha, where Bilam recommends to Balak. The suggestion was, just trying to put my notes in the right places, where he tells the Jewish people that, he says, instead of cursing them, let's seduce them. If we seduce them, if we get them to behave immorally, this will be their downfall. And the Talmud tells us that the sins that happen in our parsha, the Talmud gives a lot more detail than we're familiar with. It's not stated explicitly in the Torah, but they're actually there's a whole backstory the Talmud tells us, that when Bilam saw that his cursing method wasn't getting them anywhere, he didn't give up. Of course, we could learn, there's always messages and lessons to learn from these things, right? If the parsha is called Balak, There must be messages within Balak that we have to take the positive from the negative. So he changed his tactics. And this is the weak spot that he identified within the Jewish people. He knew that God wouldn't tolerate promiscuity. So this was his new cunning plan. And because it's not in the parsha itself, I want to read it to you from the Gemara. This is Tractate Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Vav Amar Aleph, page 106a. Chances are, if you have a Gemara in front of you, you could follow along. And you use the Sefaria translation. Says the Gemara, Bilam said to them, to Balak and his crew, he says, their God hates promiscuity, lecherousness, as they translate it here. And the Jewish people love linen garments. Very interesting. I would love to do a little poll here. Do you love linen garments? Says Bilam to Balak, make tents and station harlots within them who will sell the Jewish people linen garments. When the Jewish people would eat and drink and rejoice and stroll about the market, the prostitutes would say, you're like family. Take what you want for free. How do you like that? Now, take what you want for free. I hope this is not, eliciting a whole lot of stereotypes about Jews. The Jews like linen. Okay, interesting. And secondly, the Talmud is saying, take what you want for free. Where have we heard that one, right? And another interesting thing is, you picture the desert that they travel and they journeyed and was just their camps. I found this picture on Google, actually from Wikipedia, that I put over here. I don't know if it's accurate of what it looked like when the Jewish people were in the desert, but I just had to put something in this morning. And here it's describing this whole marketplace they set up. And the harlot then would say, would you like a cup of wine? Once the Jew had drunk, he would become intoxicated and his evil inclination would be aroused. And then they would seduce the men. At this point, the harlot would take out an idol and tell him to serve it. The Jew would reply, but I'm a Jew. A Jew can't worship an idol. I mean, this is the irony here. The Talmud's telling us, you can see many different layers that we have to unpack here. That on the one hand, he's engaged in a sin already. He's committing adultery, sleeping with his woman. It's promiscuous. And yet, when he's presented with an idol, the Jew says, I can't do that. How can I worship an idol? I'm a Jew. It behooves me to behave like that. And the harlot would then say, what do you care? I'm not asking you to serve it, but just to excrete before it. And that's another fascinating thing. You think about it. How did people worship idols? You would think maybe they prostrated. What did they do? I was in India. I've seen, various forms of idol worship that goes on there in the Far East. But here, the Talmud is telling us the way they worshiped this idol, the Baal Par, was they would actually defecate before it. And these prostitutes would say to the Jews there, just do that, and then I will do what you want. Sure. Bilam, he may not have been a psychologist, but he sure knew how to manipulate things, eh? And the question that I'm sure we're left with, many people wonder, I certainly do, how could they? It's the same question we could ask about how could the same Jews worship the golden calf? Didn't they just experience 40 days before that God gave them the Torah at Mount Sinai? And in the 10 Commandments, God said, you should have no other gods before me. So how could they worship the golden calf, right? We have these same questions over and over about them. And you wonder, how could these Jews, they just experienced, we read through the Parsha, all the wonders and miracles that God performed. They saw what happened to Korach, everything left and right. And didn't we just read in this very same Parsha that Bilam tried to curse them and God transformed the curses into blessings? So why would these people now succumb to such a sin that they knew God despises? Right? And you think, when did this all take place? This happens at the end of their 40-year journey in the desert. So Bilam picks on a tactic that he knows God despises, and he gets the Jewish people. This is, you could think it's great manipulation, right? So on Bilam's perspective, he understood that if he couldn't curse us, he will get the Jewish people he will bring us down to succumb to this form of to adultery and idolatry. But my question is, if you look at the map, I'm going to pick up the map here. Sorry, nothing is necessarily accurate. I just took the app off Google. We're going to get back to this map in a moment, okay? Just the map of where they were. And just to bolster my question of how could the Jews do this? When did this incident take place? It's at the very end of their journey in the desert. They're standing with one foot practically already in the promised land. They already experienced 40 years of spiritual bliss. They were ready to throw it all away just for, what do they call it today? I think the psychology term for it, modern psychology, is something like the microwave generation, for instant gratification, just for a few moments of pleasure in this world. How could that be? They knew they wanted to go to the land of Israel. They knew everything that happened. They knew that God doesn't tolerate, this type of behavior. So how could they? But the truth is, I want all of us, and this is the way we study Torah, it's not just to look at the story. How could they behave that way? Let me ask you. Now, maybe I should just look at myself, since I see myself on the screen. See some of you too. Is this not just a human thing? This is what I opened the share with earlier. We're all intelligent creatures. And yet, I see somebody responded to my question on one of the groups this morning. My question was, why smart people do such stupid things? Someone writes, it's because they're smart. So on some level, they understand that life is short, or we live once, or whatever. Well, they say there's an expression, YOLO, you only live once. So she corrected it. The real true expression is we only die once, right? We live every day. They're very true. Anyway, that's why they do stupid things sometimes, to enjoy life as much as they can, I think. Certainly that's true. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But it's really a question relevant to all of us. And when we look at the Parsha, and we look at the Torah story, don't just think about them. They were such smart people. How could they do this? What about us? Do we ever fall low to whatever it might be for fleeting moments of passion, of pleasure? One minute we understand the consequences of our actions. We see how, in the long term, a few minutes of fun is just not worth it. A person does whatever, they cheat on their taxes, or they cheat on their spouse, or they do. Okay, you fill in the dots. We all know and think about ourselves. You're on a diet, you're trying to be healthier, just a little bit of ice cream. or we're talking about kashrut, right? Just this one thing. And never to judge somebody else. Let's just judge ourselves, okay? Because everybody's got their own challenges, their own struggles, their own problems. But the point is, if we know the consequences of our behavior, then why is it that we could get caught up in this immoral behavior? Okay, let's steer very away from immorality for a second. A diet's always a good example, because personally I don't want to diet, right? So it's easy to use that example. You know the calories are no good for you. So why are you indulging in them? Why? Don't you know that what it's going to do? It's going to set back your diet. It's going to mess it up. What happened? So perhaps you could say it's what this message says, because they're smart and they make a decision that at this moment I want to enjoy. You only live once. You only die once. Change it from YOLO to YODO. But here's something. And this is why I'm going to put the map back up here, because this is something our sages tell us. And you'll learn this, and I'm going to share with you the Hasidic perspective today. In fact, it's mostly based on a book from the Hasidic Heritage series called, now I just forgot what it's called because I don't have it next to me. It's something about folly. Okay, we're gonna just, it's a mimer, it's a Hasidic discourse, and I want to share with you some ideas. And here is something that Targum Yonatan, there's various commentaries in the ancient commentaries, probably post Talmudic era or post Temple's destruction. were mostly written in Aramaic, but they're very interesting commentaries. And here's one from Targum Yonasan, who points out something in the name of the place where this happened. Where did this happen? You know, when the Jews traveled from Egypt to Israel, it took 40 years, but they had 42 stops, or the actual word is 42 journeys. That's not next week's parsha, in 2 weeks. So next week is Pinchas, and the week after is Matos Maseh. And in Matos Maseh, we're going to read, it's a double portion. Maseh is about the journeys. And it doesn't say 42 stops. It says they had 42 journeys. It's an interesting concept, and maybe we'll talk more about that in 2 weeks' time. So which journey or stop was this along the way? It's a place called Shittim. And you can see here from this Google picture that I took that it is numerated in our parsha here in Bamidbar, but it's also in Joshua. Why? Because this is the place basically where they went from here into the land of Israel. So it's the very end of their journey. But what's interesting is, if you look at the word Shittim, our sages tell us that it's related to the word shtus. What's also interesting for me is the very first discourse of the Rebbe called Basi Legani, where he takes a verse from King Solomon in Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. It says, Basi Legani Achesikal. God refers to this world not as a jungle, but as a beautiful, magnificent garden. And in this discourse, the very first, you could call it as a inaugural address, this concept the Rebbe talks about there. And it's one of the ideas that Hasidus discusses a lot. The word Shittim, which is a geographic location somewhere in the Sinai desert. And Hasidus tells us it's related to the word shtus. What does shtus mean? Shtus means folly, silliness. So indeed, our sages tell us back then when the Jewish people sinned, as we read in our parsha, they were basically acting very foolish in a silly way. And this is the words of the Targum Yonasan. He says, Vayise, let me just quickly read it. The Savior of Asra, he says, Israel settled in this place called Shittim. It's in our parsha. It's where this incident takes place. Why, he says this? Because the folly and the corruption that took place within them. Based on what he's saying is, why is it called Shittim? The name Shittim, maybe that's what happened after they got into trouble. They were Shittim, not just, they were in trouble. But the word Shittim, he says, is related to the word Shtus. So it seems from the words of the Targum that it's related, that maybe the name of the place actually is related to the incidents that took place there. So maybe there's no geographical place called Shittim really. It's because the word Shittim means Shtus, foolishness, folly. And that's why this area is called that, because the Jews acted foolish in this place. So now here's the thing that our sages are telling us. The Talmud discusses this, and Hasidus elaborates on it, that foolishness, folly is the root of all sin. Yes, we are rational beings. We're smart people. Speaking for you. Right? On paper, any person could explain why being unfaithful to their spouse, as the Jews behaved here, as we read in our parsha, or dealing with whatever immoral behavior it might be. Now, when a person gets onto drugs, you think they don't realize, how dangerous this could be and where it could lead them to? Why did they do it? Why did they do it? Aren't they smart? Oftentimes, they're very clever people. So the idea that Hasidus is telling us that when, even in a basic example, like I said, when I'm wasting time and I know that I have a paper due, why would I waste my time? Or not necessarily wasting time even. Maybe I'm just doing something that's not the call of the moment. Maybe I'm taking phone calls or doing other things that I shouldn't be. And each of us could fill in whatever it might be. Do we not know? You think I'm not thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to cram later. I don't know how I'm going to write that paper when I have, there's so much to do. Oh, I'll get an extension and another. What? My son is, bar mitzvah's coming up, please God, next week. Don't know yet what we're doing. I can't even tell you all. But he's got to study for his bar mitzvah. And every day, mom and dad, okay, I shouldn't be divulging this type of information on publicly. He's not going to like it. But I was the same, so I could say it. We have to study for the bar mitzvah. We have to study for other things. And what do? It's so easy to get distracted. So let me ask you, where is that coming from? if we're clever and we're smart and we know that it's wrong. This is
Rabbi,
what.
is that our Yetzer Hara?
Oh, so where does the Yetzer Hara get it from? So I want to share with you, I want to go a little bit deeper into this psyche of sin, and you could apply it to any aspect of life, whether it's diverting, digressing from what we're supposed to do. The Yetzer Hara. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that today. So thanks for sharing that. This is where that shtus, okay, remember the word shtus because it's a word that's used, and for the Israelis on watching or listening, I don't know how you pronounce it, they may be shtut. Yeah, maybe you say shtut, but in Ashkenazic Hebrew, it's shtus. So this idea of folly, once you're gripped by folly, that's when things become more blurry. And what's right is no longer the only deciding factor in our decisions. And that's when sin happens, when all of a sudden the lines are blurred a little bit. That's the problem that our sages are telling us happens here. And this is a serious problem that we might not be familiar with, right? Even though we're rational, even though we're logical, but there's something that gets in here. And this is what we need to talk about. The Gemara tells us, Reish Lakish is that great sage who I shared with you previously was once a bandit. He was a robber. He was a bad guy. And he became one of the greatest sages of Israel. And you might say, what can we learn from a bandit? What do we say in Pirkei Avos? We can learn from everyone. And this is the power of Teshuvah that we've discussed many times at these shiurim. Just because he had a not so good past doesn't stop him from becoming a great scholar as he became. Reish Lakish, knowing what a bad past is like, he shared with us a little insight of someone who was previously a bandit. And he says, Ein Adam over Avera ele imke nichnatz b'ruach shtus. You know when a person does something, commits a sin? If there's a spirit of folly, of foolishness that enters them. Sins, says Reish Lakish, are essentially the temporary acts of idiocy. When we sin, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're idiots altogether. But we certainly, at that moment, are behaving that way. We are committing, we're doing something, we're not being true to ourselves. We know it's wrong to do that. How many times people smoking cigarettes and doing things, and they know the candy's going to cause a cavity, and the cigarette's going to cause, God forbid, lung cancer, and the sin they commit is going to put them in a spiritually down place, and one sin leads to another, says Reish Lakish. That's the psychology of sin. It's not a bad person. And they're not necessarily insane or meshuggah. But at that moment, they are behaving, they are succumbing to, they're acting foolishly. And if we can understand that concept, then we could try to strategize to overcome it. And that's what Chassidus talks about. Chassidus gives us the tools, the methods to try to overcome our foolishness, because it's when we're foolish that we get into these, and that's why the Chassidus gives us tools such as Moach Shalat Alev, to use our mind to control our emotions, our feelings, that we shouldn't just act instinctively. So here's the idea that the start of our strategy to combat this foolishness actually is something the previous Rebbe, and I want to share with you, today is his birthday. Previous Rebbe was born on this day in 1860, in 1880, passed away in 1950 in New York. He was, and today's also his Geula. Today's the day the previous Rebbe was released from Soviet prison. Told you I would talk a little bit about it this week. Maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow because it's a 2-day festival on the Chabad calendar. Today was the day he was informed he'll be released, but it only happened tomorrow. So today has been a tremendous holiday in the Chabad circles. And the previous Rebbe said, very famous line that's attributed to him. He says, a Yid nicht der will und nicht der kann sein abgerissen von Göttlichkeit. He says a Jew simply is not able and does not desire to be separated from godliness. And here's a man who himself literally suffered from certain Jews. They were called the Yevasektia. The Yevasektia was the Jewish Communist Party. They caused them more trouble than anyone else. And it's very interesting. He said this, that if that truly at the heart, at the core, a Jew doesn't want to be separated from God. Now, I know it's hard to actually relate to that, because if that's the case, how do we sometimes do things that we know we shouldn't be doing? How's it possible that a Jewish person would eat not kosher if they don't want to be separated from God? How's it possible that we have Jews behaving in certain ways? Obviously, not all, God forbid, but even one or two or a few are a bad reflection. So how do we have people behaving in those ways? Right? So the answer obviously is that it's exactly this point. The spirit of folly, the shtus, which obviously can overtake a person sometimes. And it's no excuse. It's actually telling us what we need to do to overcome these situations. If we didn't have that shtus, that spirit of folly within ourselves, then we would be in tune. We'd be spiritually sensitive to our soul. And the soul it's horrified to behave in a way that's against God. Right? As he said, even this tiny fleeting transgression is absolutely intolerable to the soul. It would contradict the soul's very identity, which is to be in sync with godliness. And that's why the Talmud tells us, when does a person misbehave? When they have that spirit of foolishness. Because, as Rosalind mentioned before, we have two inclinations. We have our godly soul and our animal soul, our good inclination, our evil inclination. And the animal soul says, what are you so worried about? Right? A small sin is really going to do harm. What's the big deal? Is it going to affect your Jewish identity? There's plenty of other Jews that do it too. Will the world come to an end if you do this thing? Just do it. Worry about it later. Even if something goes wrong spiritually, remember, you can always patch it up later, right? Teshuvah. Didn't the rabbi talk about teshuvah? You can always repent. No big deal. Besides the point, if you're going to have this instant gratification, it's fun. Wouldn't you want to have some fun right now in the moment? And this is the kind of conniving methods that the Yetzer Hara uses. And the truth is, the idea, obviously, we don't realize it when we're doing something wrong. And again, I'm not only talking about sins. You could apply this to any aspect in life. That's why I tried to give you simple examples where you're not harming anybody else. It's just my paper that's due soon. Just my whatever it is that I'm procrastinating with. Apply this to any aspect of life. When we're presented with something fun and quick, what happens? We jump on board. We go happily with it because it's more fun for me to be on my phone and update my Facebook status and whatever other fun things I could do right now than to write my term paper. It's more fun to do that than to study the Parsha for my bar mitzvah. And when you have at work and you have serious commitments, and it's just more fun to do something else at the moment. And so what does the folly say? What's really so bad about this? Right? What if it goes against who you are and what you stand for? It's a small, insignificant thing. Life will move on. It's no big deal. Good morning, Tamara and Shlomo. So good to see you. Shlomo, isn't it your birthday sometime this week? I think it's Shlomo Kirsch's birthday. I'm not sure what day, but I believe it's one day this week. So I just want to wish you a happy birthday as you're joining us here in the shir now. So here's the point, and I think is very important for us to bear in mind. What does it mean that a person doesn't commit a sin unless the spirit of folly enters them? Let's try to understand it from the soul's perspective, and hopefully it will give us a little bit more of a stronger way to grapple with this idea. While it might be easy for the animal soul to convince us, right, to do this, whatever it might be, nobody's watching, but there are boundaries that it's not going to cross, right? Sometimes we recognize there's an existential threat, as we saw in our parsha, where they said, worship the idol. No, that I won't do. What do you mean you won't do? Your Torah allows you to sin, to commit adultery? That is allowed? So all of a sudden, when it's a certain red line, you feel like, oh no, I can't go there. That's too much. We understand with every fiber of our being that to renounce my faith, to worship an idol, that's the ultimate blow to my very existence. So here's this strange phenomenon. It's a striking For thousands of years, millions of Jews who were very distant from any serious engagement, observance of Judaism, gave up their lives when they were given the choice between apostasy and death, the equivalent of idolatry. All their days, the spirit of folly was hard at work, was belittling the seriousness of kosher, of shul, of Shabbos, of whatever it might be. But in the moment of truth, they understood perfectly well what they had to do. They wouldn't give up their basic religious perspective, because to them that was a defining moment. And this is a concept that's discussed at great length in Tanya, this idea that there are certain red lines that a person has, and a person wouldn't cross those particular behaviors. So here you have people in the parsha who are committing adultery, but idolatry, no way. That's already crossing the line. How is it possible? Right? What's the difference? Is adultery not as bad as idolatry? Aren't they part of the same 3 cardinal laws that Jews are not supposed to violate? So in Tanya, it's explained that the folly here is that a person ignores a basic truth. And the idea is that even if I'm doing something, maybe a person draws a line, what's a minor sin, maybe they rationalize it. Okay, maybe they say, my wife won't mind, or maybe there's some kind of a faribble between them. There's some kind of rationalization. And they start convincing themselves, I could do something that, it's not so bad. The thing is, God laid out for us quite clearly what's demanded, what's expected from us, and what we're not allowed to do. So since when do we get to pick and choose what we're going to, this I like, but this I don't like? Is it a multiple choice? Is it a buffet? Is like options? This mitzvah I like, that one I don't. So God said don't commit adultery, just like God said don't commit murder and don't worship idols. So how could this person commit adultery, and yet when he's offered the idol to worship, says no way? How does that happen? How does a person even distinguish between what's small, what would be abominable to God, and what wouldn't be? So in Tanya, it's explained at length, which I'm not going to do right now. But the idea is that it's the spirit of folly that, and if each person it's different, please don't, I'm not in any way defining, because for someone else it might be about the relationship with God that perhaps they don't take seriously, but with their spouse it is more serious. I don't know. The point is that when a person behaves in that instant gratification mode, they perhaps don't realize that they're defying the connection with Hashem. And therefore, the Talmud tells us, what is it that causes that? It's that spirit of folly. They're blindsided by the simple truth that whatever they're doing is actually severing their connection to God. They are both forbidden by the Torah. But unfortunately, when people are in that instant gratification mode, they forget to they don't realize there's that instant, they just want the joy, the pleasure. In Kohelet, and King Solomon says these words. He says that, let me pick it up here. Let me try to find it. Give me a second. He says, Toiv yeled miskein v'chacham mimelech zaken uchsil. Better a poor and wise child, Toiv yeled miskein v'chacham mimelech zaken uchsil, than an old foolish king. Asher lo yada li'zaroid, who no longer knows how to take care of himself. What does that mean? So it's explained as follows. Let me just pick it up here. Here it is. What's better a poor and wise child than an old and foolish king? What does King Solomon mean by that? I mean, he was a wise king, wasn't he? So he says the evil inclination is what is referred to as the foolish king. The evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, is called a foolish king. And the Yetzer Tov is compared to the wise child. And what is this meant to mean? So the Talmud discusses this and says, why is it called a child? Why is the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, called a child? Because it only enters a person at the age of 13. Why is it called poor? Because not everyone listens to it. Why is it called wise? Because it teaches people the proper way. Now, the evil inclination is called an old foolish king. Why is it called a king? Because everyone listens to it. Why is it called old? Because it is part of a person from a young age. You know, we have it all the way through life. And why is it called foolish? Because it teaches us to behave foolishly in evil ways. And then the King Solomon also says, who no longer knows how to take care of himself because it doesn't know how much pain and suffering will come and is not cautious. So the main idea, I guess, is that the good inclination is the voice of reason and morality, while the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, is the voice of that reckless passion that we sometimes engage in. So while the Yetzer Tov is all about what's right and proper, the evil inclination is about what I feel like doing. Not what's right, what I feel like. And if you look at modern society, everything's about my rights. Judaism is not about rights, it's about responsibilities. So for the evil inclination, it's everything else isn't, don't tell me, I have the right, I'm entitled. We act foolishly based on what we're entitled. Unfortunately, the good inclination finds itself at a disadvantage because, the evil inclination is always more tempting. It's always more fun. It's always more cool. And all day long, it's trying to entice us and telling us all the different things that we should take advantage of and enjoy. And look at our parsha right here. What do we say? That the Jewish people, they are in this place called Shittim. And Bilam knew that to succeed in getting the Jews to stumble, there would be a process. And that process was to seduce them. And by seducing them, getting these seductive women, offering fine wine and linen, and then they'll get them into idol worship. And this is the idea that the Talmud tells us is the battle between good and evil. And it's something that our parsha is an example, but we can apply it to every aspect of life. It's the same battle that we face all the time between wisdom and foolishness. So if we want to have a chance at succeeding in this battle of overcoming the evil inclination, we can't just try and convince ourselves that I'm going to resist it, because what happens is we just repeat the same thing over and over again. Rather, we have to come up with a cleverer way to overcome it. So, but what's the best way to be smart about this? What do you think it is? Therefore, we have 10 minutes remaining. Let me share with you some more words of wisdom from King Solomon, who says as follows. He says that, V'ra'isi, here, listen to these wise words of King Solomon in Kohelet. And I saw that there is an advantage to wisdom over folly. Brilliant, King Solomon, right? And he compares it like the advantage of light over darkness. Wow, wonderful. Very bright wisdom from King Solomon. Now let's just try to unpack it for a moment, because obviously he was a wise man. And if he's telling us these words, we have to try to understand it. Think about this for a moment. Light and dark are two powerful and opposing forces. In the battle between the two, each one has an advantage. Right? The advantage of darkness is that it just is. Right? Without a shining light, the world is just dark. No action is needed to maintain that darkness. Just ask Escom. Don't need to do anything. But if you want to light up a room, you need a source of light. And that's why we have a famous teaching of Ma'at or Dochek Harbe Choshek. A little bit of light will banish a lot of darkness. Darkness might be the default state of life, but it's impossible to actively darken a room. You can't. It has no substance. It's just a lack of something. The only way to combat the darkness is to bring in light. And from then on, that space is, it's a one-sided battle. Just a little bit of light will drive away a whole lot of darkness. So what's Shlomo HaMelech telling us? The advantage, what he says, the advantage of Chachma, right? What's the advantage of wisdom over foolishness? Like light over darkness. It's a beautiful analogy he's telling us. The foolishness inside of us is the Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination. The wisdom is our Yetzer Tov, our good inclination. Just as light is a far more powerful force than darkness, says King Solomon, so is wisdom. Wisdom is far stronger than foolishness. But we have to understand, to apply it, you have to do something active. You have to actually switch on the light. You're going to have to activate the light. You're going to have to do something about it. Like darkness, which has no real substance, it's the default state of the world, says Hasidus that folly is the default state of the body. That's the way God made us. We have an evil inclination. We're tempted by things, which we discussed many times, the way it works, because we have free choice and God wants us to make the right choices. If you do nothing to fight the temptations of life, if we're just overtaken by them and we just capitulate and concede and always do succumb to whatever comes our way, then of course, what's going to happen? I'm just not in the mood. Rather just relax. But then we're not going to achieve anything. We said yesterday, some people dream of success. Other people wake up and make it happen. Some people look at their mistakes, at what they've done wrong in the past and say, that's me. Big deal. Others say, you know what, I'm not perfect. I recognize that, but I will work on fixing myself. I'll do something to become better. Just as darkness is fought by lighting that candle, and that automatically is going to banish the darkness, same thing, we have to combat our foolishness by actively ensuring that we activate our wisdom. That's the idea of Moach Shalit Alev. Use your mind to control your instincts, your heart, your impulses. So what happens when we face these situations? How do we prevent ourselves from falling again into that same trap of the never-ending time wasting, of finding all types of distractions? What do? What's the solution? I would say something that I learned from Dale Carnegie and from Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits, but it's all in the Torah, and that is be proactive. I think it's the first of the 7 Habits is be proactive. And when we find ourselves repeatedly engaging in negative behavior, or when we find that no matter how hard we try, we simply aren't able to make the best use of our time, then we need to ask ourselves, does my time and my behavior control me, or do we control it? Which way is it? Because you have to flick on that switch. And in Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, discusses this idea in the section of Orach Chaim, the ways of life, and discusses the laws that we're supposed to do when we wake up in the morning. We all know the way we start our day. How do we start our day? Let me read these words to you from Shulchan Aruch. It says as follows: the first thing in the morning we have to do is overcome our evil inclination. You have to wake up like a lion. Of course, if we go to bed like a dog, how are we going to wake up like a lion? Therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says, wake up from our slumber before daybreak. To know our purpose, to serve our Creator. We should wake up the morning, not the morning to wake us up. As it says, I will awaken the dawn. I awaken the dawn. The dawn does not awaken me. And I think if we want to conclude with this message for life, what does it mean that we wake up the dawn versus having the dawn wake us up? There are two types of people. The first might be the ones who are woken up by the morning, okay? The person wakes up and finds themselves in bed. Oh my goodness, what time is it? It's already 6:30, 7:30 in the morning. It's late. I got to get out of bed. I got to go to work. I got to go here. I got to go there. This is a life that's constantly responding to circumstances. We see the world moving around us, right? We realize that we have things to do, so we're forced to react accordingly. In the words of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that is called reactive, not proactive. Now, do we have a chance of taking control? The day's controlling us. What happens then? There's a YouTube video. Somebody sends me a WhatsApp. And you know how it works in today's day and age. People get faribbled and offended if you didn't respond to their WhatsApp in 10 seconds before they even wrote you, they're expecting the response. Shame. Is WhatsApp here to serve me, or am I here to serve it? And therefore, the Torah tells us that we want to succeed. I wake in the morning. That we go to sleep at night. We have already a plan for the next day. And you could talk practically about whether it's setting up your clothing, setting up your schedule. I love to make meetings early in the morning with people because it's the best way for me to get the day started in the right way. From a spiritual perspective, we know we have to pray. It's our first priority in the morning. We serve God. So we don't have to be forced to get out of bed because we do it. We wake up in the morning. We're in control of the day. Nobody's perfect. I'm not, and trust me, I'm not the best role model for this. But this is the idea I want to share with you that Hasidus teaches us. And so, my friends, unfortunately, I got to leave to a funeral in a few minutes. But the message that I want to share with you is that when we are proactive and we thoughtfully consider how much time we need for each of our things, then we put it into our schedule and we gain control of our life rather than life controlling us, whether it's having a calendar, putting in the events of the day, knowing what our priorities are. As Jewish people, we know there are times in the day, I have Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. Our 3 prayers have to stay in the day. What's working around what? And we can apply this to every single aspect of life that we want to get a handle on. You take money, right? Some people go to the store without a clear idea of what they want or what they need. They see something on the shelf, they think they should get it. They do. No budgeting, no forethought, no afterthought, just spending on the spur of the moment. And what happens? They rack up debt, right? People watch an infomercial on TV and all of a sudden they get excited. They have to buy this gadget and the other gadget. And they need this, they sign up to the latest car and the latest phone and the latest shtick. And they don't realize how much money is coming into the account. Maybe for somebody in the rabbinic position where we hardly have anything. So, maybe it's easier for me to say this. But the point is, we need that discipline in order to be proactive. That's moach shalit al-alev. That's the concept Hasidus teaches us, that we are in control of our instincts, not the other way around. And the same is true when dealing with our animal soul, with our evil inclination. All of a sudden, you have all these temptations, as the Parsha tells us, or whatever it might be, and we're just not inspired to be spiritual, or we get angry or selfish. What do? Take the cue from the lesson. What does Hasidus teach us? We have to be proactive. This is long before Dale Carnegie and Stephen Covey. If we are in control, instead of the temptations controlling us, if we could keep the light on, that's being proactive, not just reactive, and then we're in good shape. We make sure we exercise, we make sure we keep our diet, we make sure we're kosher, we make sure we're spiritual, we make sure we pray. So let's conclude with the story in our Parsha, because there's one key detail that we mentioned, how the sin seems so absurd, right? We look back at them. How could they behave this way when they experienced godliness in the desert, all the wonders and miracles that God performed? You ever ask yourself the same question? How did they get caught up in this nonsense, right? Couldn't they have just kept the light on? We know it's not so easy. So the Medrash tells us that all the good that they experienced also led them to the downfall. And that's a very important point we have to keep in mind, is that sometimes we get into a place, we think we're good. We're good with our diet, we're good with our finances, we're good with our business, we're good with whatever it might be. That's when we're reactive and not being proactive. All of a sudden, we we lose, we're not on guard. That's the problem. Don't let your guard down. This is a very important point. You have to actually be proactive, because complacency is a dangerous place to be. Look at Israel's experience. After the 6-day war, Israel let its guard down. What happened? Yom Kippur War. They got attacked. Golda Meir, who was the prime minister at the time, fully accepted that responsibility. She realized, no, we'll never be attacked. We're invincible. Just as Israel wasn't invincible, we're also not invincible. We are Israel. We have to constantly be on guard. And this is what happened in our Parsha. The Medrash tells us they let their guard down. Success in overcoming our shtus, our foolishness, whatever that might be in our lives, is not an excuse to relax, to become complacent. Yes, there's time to relax, a controlled relax, right? When I'm in control, not that it just takes over me. You're on holiday? Good. You're in control of your holiday. Make sure it's a holiday, not a vacation, because the light always needs to be on in order for it to banish the darkness. The flame of wisdom in our soul needs to be continuously stoked to avoid the default state of that just reactive life. So even if we had good progress in the past, we have to make sure that we're still strong, that we're still active, and we have to know what's right and what's wrong. That, my friends, is the key. I think there's some more points I had in mind, but I'm going to have to go. But this is the short of it. We have to keep that flame constantly stoked in order to be spiritually on top of things. And that's the message, my friends. We're going to end it here today. Any questions before we go? Okay. I'm sorry I'm running to a funeral. Zeitgesund. Hope you all enjoyed the shiur. Please, God, we'll see you tomorrow. I'll try to do something about this special during the Chabad calendar about the previous Rebbe. We'll see what we could put together. All the best.